I traveled for 10 hours from Boston to Bramble Creek, Indiana, with a trunk filled with wrapped presents and a mind swirling with reasons to keep going. The house appeared smaller than I remembered, with faded shutters and a garden my mother once cherished, now overrun with weeds and mulch. Nevertheless, I stepped onto the porch wearing a practiced smile. When the door swung open, my father filled the doorway. Frank Whitmore, 6 feet of weathered pride and silence, arms crossed. Before I could say anything, he looked at me as if I were a stranger who had wandered into the wrong driveway. Then, with the same voice that once told bedtime stories and set curfews, he said, "We don't have a daughter. Please leave." Behind him stood my brother, Tyler, who looked unfazed, even amused, a half smirk on his face. He was twirling a worn keychain with a small purple sunflower charm, the one I had received for my 16th birthday, from which my bedroom key used to hang. Apparently it still did. I waited for someone, anyone, to say this was a mistake, but no one moved. No one blinked, not even my mother, whom I hadn't seen yet. That absence stung more than the words spoken. I didn't cry or shout. I merely stepped back, one foot catching on the edge of the porch step. The gift bags in my hands trembled, but I didn't let them drop. Not yet. What do you do when the home you saved no longer remembers your name? There was a family photo that used to hang above the mantel, my father in the middle, stiff in his Sunday flannel, my mother beside him with her hands neatly folded in her lap, Tyler and I on either, side like matching bookends. I always smiled a little too broadly. He never smiled at all. Visitors often said we looked like a postcard, unaware of how carefully the angles were chosen and how frequently we were told to stand still and not ruin it. Frank Whitmore managed our household like he ran his construction teams. No excuses, no emotions, and absolutely no deviation. He believed in order and hard work, in sons who built and daughters who obeyed. He praised Tyler for merely breathing. At the dinner table, my brother could burp out a sentence and still elicit laughter. When I brought home straight A's, Dad glanced at my report card as if it were a grocery list and said, "Good," already turning back to his meatloaf. Tyler struggled in school but knew how to play Dad like an instrument, asking for advice he didn't, need and mimicking opinions like a mirror held at an angle just enough to appear vulnerable. By 15, he was a master at the performance. Mom, Evelyn, was the soft one. Her hands always smelled of lavender lotion and bread dough. She tucked notes into my lunchbox and waited up for me when I stayed late at the library. Once, when I was 13, I overheard her arguing with Dad behind the laundry room door. "Claire deserves better than silence," she said. "She's not asking for permission, just recognition." He didn't shout. He simply closed the washing machine lid and walked out. She followed, quiet again. That was the last time I remembered her raising her voice. I used to think that if I achieved enough, I'd earn his approval, that perhaps one day he'd see me the way he saw Tyler, with pride, or at least ease. But with every competition I won and every scholarship I applied for, the gap only widened. Dad started calling my ambitions fancy nonsense, saying I was chasing things that didn't really matter. "You'll get married anyway," he told me once while wiping grease off his hands. "No man wants a wife who talks numbers." So I stopped, showing him, hiding things that mattered to me. By the time I got accepted into Boston University on a full scholarship, I had already forged his signature on the acceptance form. He never found out, or if he did, he never mentioned it. He just nodded when I left and said, "Don't expect help when it falls apart." I was 17 and already accustomed to being invisible in a house where I used to belong. Boston didn't welcome me with open arms, but it didn't question my departure either. The city had its own sharp, fast, and unforgiving rhythm, which I learned to match. Classes by day, waitressing by night, student loans, part-time jobs, scholarships, and no space for breakdowns. I grew accustomed to ramen and paper cups, to silence on holidays, to waking before sunrise and going to sleep with lecture notes in my hands. I called home occasionally. Sometimes my mother answered in whispers, sometimes not at all. Tyler never picked up, and my father never tried. By 23, I had graduated with honors. By 25, I was managing investment portfolios larger than anything my father's company had ever envisioned. At 26, I signed a lease for a one-bedroom apartment overlooking the Charles River, filling my fridge with things no one else chose for me. There was something quietly proud about that, Maybe real. Then, on a Tuesday in late autumn, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice trembled before she said hello. "The bank is taking the house, Claire." I stood frozen in my office, a spreadsheet open but untouched. She spoke in fragments. Missed payments, a lost contract, Frank refusing to acknowledge. Anything was wrong. They were 2 months away from foreclosure. "He won't listen," she whispered. "I don't know what to do." She wasn't asking for money. She never did. But she was asking for me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I ran numbers, my savings, my bonuses, my stock options. The next morning, I called a lawyer and established Blue Fern Holdings LLC. 2 weeks later, I purchased the house I grew up in, not in my name, but through Blue Fern. I became the invisible legal owner, paying the overdue mortgage in full. I arranged for the bank to issue a fake letter concerning special refinancing terms due to a long-standing payment history. It was my mother's idea. "He can't know you helped," she said. "His pride wouldn't survive it." I agreed, not out of respect for his pride, but for her peace. She called me 2 days after the papers went through. "He's relieved," she said. "He thinks the bank recognized his integrity." I didn't laugh or respond. After that, the payments became just another line in my monthly budget. The house I had once fought so hard to escape now sat on my balance sheet like a dormant memory. Tyler moved back in a few months later after yet another failed startup, taking over the basement. Mom said he called it his home office. I asked if she was okay. She changed the subject, as she always did. Occasionally, I'd send her birthday cards, a small gift, a photograph from Boston. No replies ever came. Sometimes I wondered if she even received them, but I kept sending them because that house still held the scent of cinnamon in old photos, and part of me still believed that one day she'd find them all and remember who kept the lights on. 2 years passed. I didn't call anymore. I didn't stop caring, but caring had begun to feel like pushing against a door that would never open. Then, one evening, just before Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Claire, please come home this year. I miss you. We need to be a family again." 11 words. Not a phone call, not a follow-up, just that, with no punctuation after again. I stared at the screen for a long time. The last message I had received from her was a forwarded recipe. No greeting, no sign-off, just thought, "You might like this?" I showed the text to my neighbor Jessica, the only friend who'd stayed through every season of my silence. "Do you think she means it?" I asked. "I think she's trying," Jessica replied softly. "Trying doesn't always look how we want it to." So, I quietly said yes to myself. I requested the week off work, wrapped 3 gifts, a leather wallet for Dad stamped with his initials, a set of hand tools for Mom's garden, even though she hadn't touched it in years, and a silver watch for Tyler, more than he deserved. But still, I packed carefully. Nothing flashy, no big city labels, just a burgundy sweater, plain black pants, and flats that wouldn't scuff the porch. I wasn't looking to make a statement. I was just coming home, or at least trying to. The drive from Boston to Bramble Creek took 10 hours. I knew every curve, every highway diner, every billboard. The closer I got, the more the landscape shifted, glass towers giving way to gas stations and silos. Late autumn had painted the trees in fiery orange and gold, leaves drifting down like memories that hadn't settled. I passed Mrs. Ellsworth's porch with the same giant turkey cutout she'd used since I was 9, and then I turned onto Sycamore Lane, the street where my name once belonged. I slowed the car in front of the house. It looked different, or perhaps I did. The shutters were darker, the lawn patchier. A satellite dish now clung to the side like a parasite. I reached for the gift bags, steadying my hands. Was I coming home, or merely arriving at the place I used to live? The front steps creaked under my shoes as I hesitated at the welcome mat. A new one, stark, generic, and black. No more painted sunflowers, just the Whitmore family in rigid block letters. I rang the doorbell. The old chime used to echo softly. This one buzzed like a hotel check-in counter. Heavy footsteps approached. I knew the rhythm before I saw the man. The door opened, and my father stood there in a plaid shirt, his expression unreadable. His hair was completely gray now, and his eyes, the same color as mine, were colder than I remembered. "Dad," I began, "it's me." He didn't blink, Didn't ask why I was there, didn't even step aside. "We don't have a daughter," he said, flatly. "Please leave." I thought I must have misheard. Maybe the wind had twisted his words. "What?" Behind him, Tyler leaned in from the hallway, still broad-shouldered, still shorter than Dad. He smiled, not genuinely, but like someone who has won a game you didn't realize you were playing. Between his fingers, he twirled my old keychain, the purple sunflower charm dangling like a trophy. "Sorry you came all this way," he said. "We've moved on. Family's tighter now, smaller, but better." I searched behind them for movement, for my mother's voice, her footsteps, a breath. Nothing. "Where's Mom?" I asked, my voice low. "Not your concern anymore," my father replied. I looked past him. The hallway was dim, but I could see enough. The wall of family photos had gaps, spaces where frames once hung, every picture of me gone. Beyond that, my old bedroom door was open, no longer blue, painted a harsh, dark green. Inside, I could make out gym equipment, a weight bench, a gaming chair. No bed, no books, no trace of 16-year-old me. "Like what I did with the place?" Tyler asked. "Needed space for my business stuff. Dad helped me convert it last year." Last year. So they had been planning this. Not just the erasure, but the replacement. I could have shouted, demanded answers, but I didn't. Instead, I looked at the keychain in his hand, the one I hadn't seen in over a decade, the year Mom had given it to me, calling it my keep going charm. Funny how it ended up in the hands of the one person who always wanted me gone. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't even anger. It was a decision made final, delivered like a verdict, and they were waiting for me to accept it. I don't remember stepping inside. Maybe it was my father who moved aside, or perhaps I moved through him like a ghost. Either way, the door clicked shut behind me, and I found myself standing in a place that smelled of strangers. Gone was the lemon polish, the faint hint of cinnamon. Now it reeked of old pizza boxes and protein powder. The living room had been rearranged. The rose-patterned pillows were gone. A massive flat-screen TV hung where Mom's framed cross-stitch. Used to be, and everywhere was Tyler. His trophies, his equipment, his mark. I turned slowly toward the hallway, where sunlight used to spill across the carpet in the afternoons. Now it felt dim, stale, and quiet. "Where's Mom?" I asked, more to the house than anyone in it. No answer came, not from my father, not from Tyler, who lingered nearby with the swagger of someone who believed they had won. I moved toward the wall where our family photos once hung. The arrangement was familiar, yet fractured, like a smile missing teeth. Gaps stood where my face used to be, and dust outlines still clung to the wallpaper. It wasn't just a mistake. They had removed me. I heard a drawer open behind me, footsteps, and then her voice. Softer, smaller than I remembered. "I didn't agree to any of this," my mother said. She stepped into view, holding a stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band. They looked worn, some torn at the edges. My handwriting stared back at me from each one. "I found these in Tyler's room," she whispered. "I thought you'd stopped writing." I took them from her, numb. They were the birthday cards, the letters, the photos from Boston, mail I had sent over the last 2 years, never knowing it never reached her. I looked up at Tyler. His face showed no apology, just a shrug. "You walked away first," he muttered under his breath. "But I hadn't," I replied. I'd called, texted, and shown up with gifts and hope, with enough history to fill a moving truck. I just hadn't been heard. "You told them I gave up," I said quietly, "that I didn't care." My mother looked at him, then at me, and something shifted in her eyes, something that resembled shame or recognition. I couldn't tell. Still, my father hadn't spoken. 3 years ago, I said to him, "You almost lost this house." He blinked, uncertain. His hands began to tremble slightly on the back of the chair. Mom called me. "You were 60 days from foreclosure." He shook his head. "That's not—" "The bank didn't cut a deal because of your record," I interrupted. "That was me. I bought the house through a holding company. I've been making the payments." The silence that followed was heavy, dense like fog before a storm. He sat down without a word. I stepped toward the side cabinet and opened the drawer where I knew he kept documents. The folder was there, and I flipped through until I found it. The title paperwork, only it wasn't what I'd signed. The buyer's name had been altered, and so had the terms. My stomach dropped. "These aren't the originals," I said aloud, mostly to myself. "They've been forged." I turned toward Tyler. He froze, his lips pressed into a line with nowhere left to go. "You were going to sell it," I accused. "You forged the transfer documents. You were going to sell the house." My mother's breath caught. My father looked up sharply. Tyler didn't. Deny it. Not really. "I had debts," he muttered. "Big ones." No one asked how much. The silence said we already knew. 80,000, maybe more, crypto gambling, another failed business, another hole to dig out of with someone else's shovel. I looked at the house, at what it had become. Not a home, but a mask. A hollow stage for loyalty that had never been mutual. And I realized I hadn't just been forgotten. I had been erased so someone else could write themselves into the center. No one moved. The accusations lay bare, not shouted, but stated plainly, like a weather report. Tyler's silence deepened into something that looked suspiciously like fear. My father sat in his chair, hands resting on his knees as if holding himself down. My mother paced once, just one step forward, one back, then stopped as if afraid to disappear if she moved. Too far. No one tried to deny what I had said. I let the quiet stretch. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. "I'm not calling the police," I finally said. That made Tyler glance up. "Yet," I added, and he looked away. But things changed today. I walked over to the small desk in the corner, Mom's old writing table now cluttered with unopened mail and fast food receipts, and placed the forged documents down carefully, like evidence, because that's what they were. "Tyler will leave tonight." No one argued. "He will enter a program. Any attempt to contact me for money, for shortcuts, for excuses ends here." I turned to my father. "You and Mom can stay in this house, but we're doing this legally. There will be a lease. $1 a month? That's not rent, it's clarity." He didn't meet my eyes, but I saw his jaw shift. A small, reluctant nod. "I'm not punishing anyone," I added. "I'm just done being erased." That was the only line. That needed to land. Tyler said nothing. He stood slowly, like a man walking away from the scene of his own accident. He paused at the hallway, glanced at Mom, then Dad. Neither reached for him. Then he looked at me for the first time that day. His voice cracked. "Where am I supposed to go?" I didn't raise my voice. "You'll figure it out." That was the last grace I had to give. He disappeared down the hall, a door slammed, a duffel bag packed in silence. I turned to my mother, who looked exhausted, as if every quiet choice she'd made over the years was suddenly demanding explanation. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she stepped closer and took my hand. "Will you stay the night?" There was something tentative in the question, not just an invitation, but a seeking of permission, as if I had become the one deciding what was allowed. I looked around the room. The couch had been replaced. The rug was newer, but in the far corner, above the heater vent, a small hook still held a single nail. Once my baby picture had hung there. Now it was empty. "Yes," I finally said, "but tomorrow we change things." She nodded slowly, squeezed my hand once, then let go. In that house filled with rearranged furniture and stolen letters, I finally sat down. This time by choice, not invitation. The next morning smelled like coffee and something burnt. Mom hadn't cooked in a while, but she tried. We sat around. The kitchen table, just the three of us, eating eggs that tasted like rubber and toast that could have doubled as cardboard. No one complained. The chairs were the same, as was the light fixture, still slightly tilted from that one winter storm years ago. But the way we sat had changed, like the air between us had shifted just enough to be noticed. My father passed, me the butter without speaking, while my mother poured coffee as if it were a question we didn't know how to answer. We didn't talk about Tyler, we didn't mention the keychain, though I found it later that afternoon resting quietly on the guest bed where my overnight bag sat. No note, no apology, just the small purple sunflower looking up at me as if it remembered everything. I placed it in my coat pocket, not to carry it, just to know where it was. Before I left, I stopped in the living room. That empty nail above. The heater still waited, quiet and a little rusty. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask for the picture to be put badit. Stocked with groceries I had chosen, filled with the foods that nourished me, not just physically, but emotionally. I had a decision to make. I could continue to live in the shadows of my past, or I could embrace the present and shape my future. I chose the latter. That night, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I began to draft a letter, not just to my mother, but to my father and brother as well. It was time to lay everything out, to share my truth, to express my feelings about the past and the hope I held for the future. I wrote about my accomplishments, my struggles, and the emptiness I felt when they chose to forget me. I poured my heart onto the page, hoping it would serve as an olive branch, a way to bridge the gap that had grown between us. I finished the letter and printed it out, folding it neatly and placing it in an envelope. Then I addressed it simply. To my family. I knew I would have to confront them again, but for now, this letter would be my first step in attempting to rebuild what had been lost. I hoped it would spark a conversation, a chance to understand each other and the choices we had made. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a flicker of hope. Change was possible, and while it might take time, I was ready to fight for my place in my family's story once again.